today was all about lighting that first spark and doing everything we can to empower men and women across this country to say there's a better way. We want our kids and our grandkids to have a better future than we did, and we know this current path we're on isn't producing it, but we can get back to the values that made America great.
All right, that was Senator Ted Cruz from earlier today at Liberty University. He joins us now with more for the full hour tonight. All right, let me go back to the economy. 50 million Americans, food stamps, 50 in poverty. You have 92 million Americans out of the workforce, 100 trillion in unfunded liabilities, 18 trillion in debt. All right. You talk about growth and getting it up to what the average growth has been, which we're not at this point. And you said you would cut spending, raise taxes. Do you think you can do all of this without raising any taxes?
Absolutely, yes. And if you look historically at how does growth happen, it doesn't come from government, it comes from the private sector. But government can screw it up. And historically, there have been three levers that government applies to create an environment where small businesses can create growth. And the whole focus should be small businesses, because 2/3 of all new jobs come from small businesses. The first factor is tax reform. The more burdensome, the more complicated the tax code, the less growth you have. The simpler the tax code, the less burden, the more growth you have. There's a direct correlation.
And you wanted a flat tax, not a fair tax. Why flat over fair?
Look, I support a fair tax. If you gave me a button and I could push an ideal outcome, I'd push for the fair tax. I think a consumption tax makes more sense than a tax on production. But I think getting to a fair tax is going to take some real time. I think we still have a significant burden to persuade others. And I think a flat tax is a much more achievable middle ground. And so what I'm campaigning on is a simple flat tax where every American can fill out his or her taxes on a postcard.
All right. How big a part of the equation in the economy is health care? It's not, well, by the time the next person becomes president, if it's you, it will have been voted on about 7 years ago. That's a long time. It's almost institutional at that point. How do you repeal it? Costs have gone up some 24%. It's costing the government more than they originally estimated. What do you do, and how big a portion of that is in the economic equation of getting to that balanced budget?
It's a huge portion. As you know, today is the 5th anniversary of the president signing Obamacare into law. That's one of the reasons I announced this campaign today, because I think Obamacare has been the biggest disaster, the biggest train wreck. It has cost millions of Americans their jobs, forced them into part-time work, cost them their health care, their doctors, their health insurance premiums are skyrocketing. And listen, the sad reality is an awful lot of Republicans, both in Washington and outside of Washington, are resigned to leaving Obamacare in effect. I am convinced in 2017 we will see a Republican president in the White House sign legislation repealing every word of Obamacare, and then we will pass common sense health care reform that expands competition, that keeps government away from getting between you and your doctor, and that makes health insurance personal, portable, and affordable.
Okay. The New York Times pointed out today that the single most important issue or determinant in an election, I'm sure you read it, is the, quote, elites. I'll add to that, they quoted that you were the most hated man in the Senate. This dovetails right out of health care. And when you did your 22-hour filibuster, John McCain's called you a wacko bird, and you were called a bomb thrower by Senator Rick Santorum, two of your, I guess, biggest fans. But the question is, how do you, when they say you're the most hated man in the Senate, why is that? Why are some people in your party so against Ted Cruz and angry that you did the filibuster?
You know, Sean, when the New York Times says that the Washington elites despise me, my only question is whether I have to disclose that to the FEC as an in-kind donation. I mean, frankly, I can't think of a better ground to run on. Washington is broken. And it's both parties that aren't listening to the American people.
Do you think your party let you down when you stood on health care? In other words, you said if we stand together, we could get this done. And they didn't stand with you.
Look, it's not a question of letting me down. It's a question of letting down the people who elected us. Republicans all over the country campaign saying, if you elect us, we'll fight.
In other words, if every Republican stood, you think that it would have been successful?
I think it absolutely would have been successful. Now, would we necessarily have succeeded in, at the time, defunding all of Obamacare? I don't know. That was a difficult, it would have taken a perfect storm. But I think at a minimum, we would have provided meaningful relief for millions of people being hurt by Obamacare. But it's important to point out, you know, you and I were talking right in the midst of that defund battle, and all of the D.C. graybeards in both the Democrat and Republican Party were saying this is terrible, you shouldn't be fighting against this. And you remember, they all went on TV and they said, as a result of this, Harry Reid and the Democrats are going to keep the Senate. Well, it strikes me we had a little bit of a different result. And not only did we win an historic victory, the largest majority in the House since the 1920s, 9 Senate seats, retired Harry Reid as majority leader, but the number one issue that we won the Senate on was stopping Obamacare. It was the most frequent campaign commercial of every Republican candidate. And it's interesting, it doesn't occur to any of those Republican elites or Washington elites that helping lead an effort that mobilizes and energizes millions of Americans to stop the train wreck that is Obamacare may have played a significant role in our winning the Senate.
Conservatives like myself, we've been critical of Republicans because they didn't fulfill their promise. There were a lot of show votes, symbolic votes on repealing Obamacare, but then when it came to using their constitutional power of defunding it, things got dicey. They didn't want to be blamed for a shutdown. Similarly, on the president's issue of executive orders with immigration. Do you think this president, through executive orders, do you think he's defying the Constitution?
Absolutely. I think President Obama has been the most lawless president we've ever had.
Is that impeachable? If in other words, in principle, is it, or is it something politically?
It is lawless. And at the end of the day, impeachment is a political question for the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is not moving forward with impeachment. One of the things that I tried to do for the previous 2 years, I was the ranking member on the Constitution Subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee. We put out a series of 5 reports chronicling all of the ways in which President Obama has defied the Constitution, defied federal law, and it is a profound threat to our liberty. And if there is one thing that is my touchstone that I go back to over and over and over again, it's the Constitution of the United States. And I think that's going to be a central issue in this election in 2016.
Last question on the issue of the economy. How important is securing the borders, illegal immigration as it impacts the economy, criminal justice system, healthcare system, educational system? How big an issue?
Hey, look, it's hugely important. And the American people are largely agreed. Outside of Washington, there's bipartisan agreement, number one, that we got to secure the borders. First.
What do you do with the 11 million here?
You know, you don't have to answer every question one at a time. The first thing you should do is secure the borders. The second thing you should do, and you should do it at the same time, is improve and streamline legal immigration so that we can not just welcome but celebrate legal immigrants. My dad was an immigrant who came here seeking the American dream. We're a nation of immigrants. If you want to pass something through Congress, what you do is you focus on the areas of bipartisan agreement. Democrats always want to focus on the 11 or 12 million who are here illegally because it is the most divisive political question to focus on. I would suggest let's actually get something done to solve this problem by focusing where we agree. And once we demonstrate we can solve the problem, then we can have a discussion about the next step.
You know, it's interesting. If you hear spending cuts are coming, you always get the tax increase up front. You never get the spending cuts. I would argue you would always get the amnesty and never get the secure borders. So.
Well, and we saw that in the 80s. In the 80s, Congress told the American people, we'll grant amnesty for 3 million people, and in exchange, we'll secure the borders. What happened? The amnesty happened. The border never got secured. And I think the American people aren't interested in falling for the same deal a second time.